Welcome to Prison Professors. I cannot tell you how enthusiastic I am today to introduce you to Ken Oliver. And I'm going to let Ken talk about how he and I connected with Prison Professors. But it's really an honor for me because this is really the culmination of a vision that started when I was locked inside of a prison more than 33 years ago. In fact, today is August the 12th, 2020 when we're recording this. And it was on August the 11th, 1987 that I went into the system and started a 26-year journey. And when I did, I always thought about guys like Ken Oliver, even though he didn't know it then and I didn't know it then. But I always wanted to teach and inspire more people in prison. So Ken, I really want to thank you for being a part of the program. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how we connected?
Sure. I first became familiar with you, Michael, when I was sitting in a cell in Soledad prison in Central Valley, California. And they started showing videos about your motivational speaking and your self-help workshops. So they started playing them on the institutional video channel. It was one of the few pieces of programming, video programming that you could get that was inspirational and then fed into my entrepreneurial mindset. So I used to watch it religiously just to get any kind of pearls and tidbits. And I found that a lot of your journey and a lot of your guest journey had traveled in the same trajectory as my journey. A lot of reading, a lot of self-determination, a lot of self-perseverance in crazy circumstances, as you know. So it's kind of funny. Actually, what happened is that there were a lot of lawyers involved in my case. I spent almost 9 years in solitary confinement, erroneously. And as a result of that, I ended up having to sue the Department of Corrections in California. As a result of that, a large group of attorneys represented me in that case. And one young lady named Zanetta Kim, who's a great attorney, went to Georgetown. And so she's telling me, Ken, you're a great legal mind, and I just can't believe how much legal work you've done since you were in solitary confinement. And I know this professor that I had named Sean Hopwood, right? So that's basically how it started. I said, well, who's Sean Hopwood? And she said, well, he's a guy that did some time in the federal prison system for bank robbery. And he was my professor, and he's just a great guy, and I'd love for you to meet him because I'd like for you to follow maybe that same path and, you know, join us as a lawyer. And so to make a long story short, they ended up helping me get released from prison. And one of the first stories I looked up when I came home was your story and Sean Hopwood's story. And then lo and behold, I come to find out you guys are actually connected, friends, have done some business together. So to me, it was very inspirational. I looked you up on LinkedIn. I think I friended you a while ago and just kind of followed the stuff that you were doing because you were doing a lot of the same types of things that I wanted to do. And I believe in following success and watching the things that have been done so I can kind of avoid some of those snares and traps that are laid out for you when you don't know. So I like to listen to people that do know. So that's kind of how I came in contact with you, Michael. And I'm very grateful for it.
Well, Ken, I am really grateful to talk with you. I see that you got my man Malcolm X behind you. He inspired me when I was inside of a cell, really taught me the power of communication and gave me hope that I too could go through a lengthy journey in there and come back with my dignity intact and with opportunities to live a life of meaning and relevance and contribution. And this is evidence of that anybody can do it. But Ken, why don't we start by talking about what brought you into the prison system? Why don't you give our audience a little bit of background so they know who you are and where you came from?
Sure. I was born in Northern California, grew up most of my youth in Southern California and South Central Los Angeles, where I got involved in a lot of street extracurricular activity. I started in the prison system relatively young. In my early 20s, I kind of thought I had a foot in the ground and getting my life together and was out there doing some positive things for about 5 or 6 years. And then I got caught up in a very kind of unusual case where I was a passenger in a stolen vehicle. There was a gun in the car and I got struck out under California's 3 strikes law. So I was actually given a 52-year to life sentence for joyriding. They ended up dropping the possession of a gun charge that me and my crimee had received together. So I did 24 years from the 52 years to life prison sentence. During that time, what kind of precipitated my release is I spent 9 years in solitary confinement for, lo and behold, reading political literature, Malcolm X type books, Black Panther type books, which were only one piece of the category of literature I read. I also read Warren Buffett, and I'm kind of ashamed to admit it, but I did read Donald Trump, Art of the Deal, and those types of books. You know, I had a wide variety of interests, but the prison administration kind of keyed in on what I was reading politically, because I was involved in advocacy on behalf of gentlemen in the prison system. These are level 4 prisons, maximum security prisons in California, where there's a lot of ethnic hostility, gang hostility periodically. But I was part of the Men's Advisory Council in several prisons where I would actually advocate for prisoner rights to the administration. And that always created a kind of strained relationship when you press the administration about rights such as visiting, rights such as programming, rights such as self-help groups, etc. They tend to think, the prison administrators, that you're an antagonist. At least when I first came to prison. Now they're opening up because they have programs like yours in prison, and many others that they're starting to allow in, because they realize that that model of suppression doesn't work. And so I think that they realize that if you give guys some programming, they can change their mindset and do something constructive.
You know, I served a lot of time in segregated housing unit as a direct result of the same type of thing, of either writing or educating myself or publishing books. And of course, that's okay. We can be, as long as we're proud of what we're doing and we're doing it with our dignity intact, I think that's okay. Absolutely. You know, and I think it's important for people to understand it takes trailblazers like you to really open this pathway for more advocacy. And that's why I think that every person in prison kind of has a duty and a responsibility to learn from a leadership story like yourself, so that they can kind of emulate that behavior. How old were you when you got locked up this time?
I was 28.
So you'd mentioned that this was a 3 strikes thing. Can you tell us about the other 2 convictions that resulted in you being striked out?
Sure. In the mid 80s, when I was, I think, 20 years old, I got convicted of 4 counts of burglary. And it was all one case. I did 4 years. I think I did 2 years total. It was halftime at that time in the 80s. But all of those charges kind of came together in one case. And then 6 years later, when they passed the 3 strikes law, they actually said that each count that you had in a case would count as a strike, even though you only did 1 prison sentence as a result of that. So as a result of that conviction, I had 4 strikes. We tried to litigate against it, but it didn't work.
How long did you serve on that sentence?
2 years.
So you committed 1 offense, but it had 4, or you either had 1 charge, it had 4 counts, and as a result, you got a 2-year sentence. But on the backside, there was a collateral consequence hanging over your head that exposed you to a life sentence if you got caught again. Is that right?
Well, interestingly enough, Michael, it wasn't a collateral consequence at that time. And that's one of the controversies about the law, is that I signed a contract to say X. And then later on, the state said, okay, it's not only X, it's XY, right? So I didn't know that there was a collateral consequence. Otherwise, I never would have, took that plea bargain at the time if I'd have known I was exposing myself to a potential life sentence if I ever got in trouble again. But yeah, that's exactly what happened. I actually sentenced to 4 years, but I did 2 off of that. It was halftime at that time.
So it's really important, I think, for us to share and communicate this message with people, because this program goes to a lot of county jails where people are really don't understand the impact. They're just so focused on getting out of jail immediately. They're not really thinking about the long term. And that was advice that you didn't know at that time. And as a result, massive complications followed. How did you serve those 2 years? When you went in to serve those 2 years of the 4-year sentence, could you give us an idea of your mindset at that time?
Sure. When I went in, I was still running around with the elements. I still thought that I could get over quick, make a quick buck. I was indoctrinated a little bit to some political and business literature, but at that time I was just too young to really grasp on anything that had to do with self-help. I thought that I had all the answers, like most young punks do. And thought that I, could take over the world on my own with my own devices. And obviously that wasn't true. I didn't understand how to navigate with the system or flow with the system to make it actually benefit me and my family and the things that I wanted to achieve in life. And I didn't learn that until I served this life sentence, where I really took it upon myself from really the day that I got in prison to just be a voracious reader, educate myself, figure out how I got there, what was the trajectory that actually led me there. Because although the system, the criminal justice system we know is very flawed, especially towards men and women of color, at the end of the day, I firmly believe that we have to take some sense of responsibility And there were things that I could have done and should have done to avoid the snares and traps that have been laid out for many of us coming from these communities.
So what was your educational background the first time you went into the system?
No educational, but I never went past the ninth grade.
So you never went past the ninth grade, and between that, I guess ninth grade, you're about what, 14 or 15?
14 years old.
So from 14 to 20, are you going into juvenile hall and challenges like that?
Yep. I went to juvenile hall. I went to youth authority, in and out of juvenile hall. Really was just a mess running the streets. No kind of direction. I didn't know what I didn't know. And that caused a lot of heartache to me and my family because I stayed inside some type of state system, locked in a cage.
And then you were 20 years old when you went to state prison.
Yes.
And when you went into there at state prison, you weren't getting this message, or did you, what kind of message did you receive about the best way to serve time?
The message that I got sent immediately to a level 4 prison, which is a maximum security prison at Folsom, California, which is one of, at that
when you were
time,
20.
Yes, prior to Pelican Bay opening up in California, Folsom was one of the worst prisons that you could be at. So as a young kid, essentially, I got thrown into that mix. And so for me, it was like, in order to survive, I had to run with the wolves. And me coming from an area that had a lot of gang infestation, a lot of gang members who were in that mentality and in that field, so to speak, in the prison environment, that was for many people their life. People that I went to prison with at that time were serving life sentences, and there was no possibility of release. So people were making lives for themselves there, and oftentimes that hinged on violence, reputation, how tough you could be, et cetera. It wasn't about learning. It wasn't about educating yourself, really. You would have to find pockets of guys, but there weren't a lot of education programs. There were no college programs. It was stark.
Yeah, they take a lot of hope away from people, and as a result of taking away hope, they get the outcome that follows for that.
Absolutely.
And so you did the 2 years, you came out. What did you do when you returned to society that first time?
Yeah, when I got out I got married when I was in prison during that stint. And so when I got out, I had a wife, and she got pregnant immediately when I got out. And so we had our first child. And so that kind of gave me a sense of responsibility. I got a job. I was right in the thick of the LA rebellions after the Rodney King beatings in 1992. And as a result of that, I went to work for Jim Brown, the famous football player. He had a program called America I Can, which was for gang members to go into the community and do something constructive. This was in the late 80s, early 90s. And so I kind of thought I had turned the corner. And so I had some successes out there earlier, just based on working. I started to work, and I started to say, okay, this isn't the life for me. I have a wife, I have some responsibilities. And so that lasted about 5 or 6 years, but then I lost my job, money kind of got tight, and I resorted back to what I thought I knew about how to survive. I was in a state of economic desperation. I had a family to take care of and people relying on me. And so I reached farther than what I should have reached and got back out there in the streets a little bit to hustle. And ended up catching this case that I did this life sentence on, which was a non-violent, non-serious case. I just throw that out there, not to say that people who have serious cases should be doing life sentences, but the fact that California at one time was taking people who had stolen a slice of pizza, for example, stolen a bicycle, stolen a pack of cigarettes. All these cases I'm mentioning are true stories. They would stolen a pair of jeans from Mervyn's, and giving people life sentences regardless of the severity of something they had done in the past was just not only draconian. Most people in California realized 20 years later that this was a terrible mistake, and they reversed course, changed the law.
So the crime that got you the life sentence was not even a substantive act on your part. It was joyriding. It was being in the car that somebody else stole.
Absolutely.
And then that car got pulled over. Is that right?
Yes.
Was there a weapon in the car?
Yes, there was a weapon in the car. Under the seat, there was a gun.
Okay, and then as a result of that, they charged you, but invoked the 3 strikes law.
Yes.
And what thoughts did you have when you were in that car and you saw the lights behind you? Did you have an idea that the severity would be what came, or what thoughts did you have?
No, I don't think anyone thinks that they're going to serve the rest of their life in prison, much less get 2 life sentences for something like that. I thought that I was in trouble. but I didn't think that the severity was that much. But I happened to get arrested right at the early stages when the three strikes law was passed. It was very ripe. There was an appetite for this lock them up, throw away the key from society, from the prosecutors, from the judges. I got locked up even before this case called Romero, which gave judges discretion. I mean, getting life in prison was mandatory at this time in the state of California.
What year was that?
This was in 1995, beginning of 1996.
Okay.
So at that moment, you didn't have a choice. You were going to get life if you had convicted of a felony, if you had 2 prior convictions that California considered to be serious. If you had 2 robberies in your past, it didn't matter if they were 20 years old, 30 years old, 40 years old, you were going to get a life sentence. So yeah, that was tough. And when they actually gave me the life sentence, it still didn't resonate to me that I was going to do life in prison for this. But they were serious about it, and I ended up serving 24 years of that life sentence.
Did you start off in LA County?
Yeah, started off in LA County.
LA County, and then they shipped you to, tell us the journey.
High Desert State Prison, which is one of the newer maximum security prisons.
Is that Corcoran?
It's not new now. No, it's not Corcoran. High Desert is in the High Valley up by Susanville, California.
Okay.
It's a high maximum security prison that was built very bleak in the middle of nowhere. I did my first couple years there.
Where is Susanville? What's the nearest city?
Reno.
Okay.
Reno, Nevada is actually the closest, which is about 35, 40 minutes away from Susanville, which is in Northern California, Eastern Northern California.
Okay.
It's in the middle of the woods.
So Susanville is called the High Desert.
Right. There's two prisons. One is an older medium security prison called Susanville. And then they built this high-tech maximum security prison right adjacent to it, and it's called High Desert State Prison, HDSP.
I see. And that's where you began this journey.
That's where I began immediately. There was a lot of violence there, a lot of racial violence there. Somebody got killed my first 6 months there by a guard. The FBI was currently investigating the Department of Corrections for what they were doing at Corcoran, which was setting up the gladiator fights and the shoot program.
So Corcoran is a separate high security facility in California.
High security prison. But there was, in the mid-90s, guards were setting up stage fights in the shoe yard, security housing units, solitary confinement. And as a result, the FBI had to come in and say, why are we using use of force and killing people over fistfights? There's no weapons. Guys are in their boxers, but they're just basically fistfighting. So there was a big investigation, and right during that investigation at High Desert State Prison, there was a fist fight on the yard, and somebody got killed, got shot in the head. So at that moment, the Department of Corrections created a injunction, or they were given an injunction by the court to not be able to shoot anyone in California prisons anymore unless there was a life-threatening situation. So unless you saw somebody getting stabbed, there was some type of potential for loss of life, shooting that mini 14, which a lot of officers at that time thought was a sport, you can't do it anymore. So there's been a lot less deaths in state prison as a result of correctional officer shootings of people on the prison yard. So that's kind of where I started. So it was a eye-opening experience for me at that time. I was still young.
How long were you in High Desert?
For about 18 months, close to 2 years.
And from High Desert, next stage?
Well, I went to Calipatra State Prison.
What level?
That's a level 4. All the prisons I'm naming are level 4 prisons. I did majority of my time, probably 90% of my time at level 4 maximum.
So Calipatra is a
Calipatra.
How long were you in Calipatra?
About 4 months. They had a huge racial riot there. My 3rd month there, we were on lockdown for, I think that as a result of that riot, they were on lockdown about 18 months, but they did what they call a population realignment, where they try to break the yards up and move people around to get different personalities and bodies in there to see if it'll quell the violence or the stuff will go away or subside. So I was transferred, after I was at Calipatra for maybe 4 months, I was transferred to Centinela, which is about 2 hours south on the Mexican border in Southern California, the most remote part of Southern California. I stayed there for a couple years. That was a decent chunk of time where I was able to make some progress and started reading real heavily, getting involved with positive self-help mindset. I did 2 years there and then was transferred back to New Folsom, which is where I was at in the 80s. I was transferred there.
But you were in Old Folsom in the 80s, or were you in New Folsom?
I was in New Folsom in the 80s.
Okay.
New Folsom. And then after I did time in Centinela, I was transferred back to New Folsom as a result of CDC coming up with a new rule saying that if you had X amount of time, you had to do X amount of time at what they call a 180 design level 4. There's 2 different maximum security prisons. One is a 270, which means that the guards can see 270 view of a housing unit. In a more secure maximum security prison, they call it a 180, where the guards can see 180 degrees of all the housing units. So they said, you haven't been down long enough to be at a 270, which is like a baby notch down. So we have to ship you back to
the highest security.
The highest security. So they sent me back to New Folsom. Even though I was eligible to be at 273 months later, they didn't care. You know, there's not a lot of rhyme and reason. So they threw me on the bus, transferred me back to New Folsom. I stayed there 6 months. And then I was transferred to Lancaster, California, in LA County, which is a 270 design level 4 prison. Stayed there about 4 years. Then I went to Corcoran. Went to Corcoran for about 3 months, and then they decided they were going to close Corcoran and make it into some other kind of program. So then they said, okay, everyone has to leave. So as soon as I got started there, I was bounced down to Ironwood State Prison, which is out there in Blythe, California, close to Palm Springs, towards the Arizona border. Stayed there about 4 years, and then finally I made level 3, which is medium maximum. It's the next level below 270. And I went to what they call CMC prison. CMC is California Men's Colony. I was there about 6 months, and that's kind of laid back. There's some programming and stuff there, but one day I let one of my friends read an article about George Jackson, who was a famous California prisoner, probably one of the most famous prisoners in United States history, depending on who you talk to.
Is 100 Years Solid? No, what's his book? I read his book.
Soledad Brothers.
Soledad Brothers, right, okay.
So I let him read it. And this was a legal authorized book. I mean, you can get it through Amazon and get it through the prison channels. It's no big deal.
Sure, it's a classic in prison literature. Book. Yeah.
So what happens is I go to chow, and an officer comes by the cell and does a random cell search and sees the book on my bed that my friend had just brought back after I let him read. So some friends of mine said, "Hey, Ken, they're in there tearing up your cell." I said, "Well, for what?" Right? I thought it was strange. So when they come out, they put me in cuffs and they take me over to the program facility office and they say, "Why do you have this book?" I said, "What do you mean, why do I have this book? It's one of the many books that I have. I have about 100 books of myself." And they're like, "You shouldn't be having this book at this prison, et cetera, and so forth." And they interrogated me for about an hour. So they put me in a cage, like these phone booth size cages. With them. And I stayed there till like 1 a.m. while they continued. They sent like multiple people to search my cell. So they found another George Jackson book, which was called Blood in My Eye. And they said, "Oh, we're going to take you to administrative segregation." And I said, "For what?" And they said, "Well, we think because you're reading these books, there might be a possible gang tie." I said, "Are you kidding me? You got to be joking." So I'm thinking it's a joke, right? I hadn't done anything. No one had said I'd done anything other than have these books, which I received through proper channels. So to make a long story short, they send me to the hole. I stay in the hole for 10 months while they do this investigation.
What year is this?
This is in 2008.
Okay.
So I'm sitting in administrative segregation, and they're telling me about this process they had in California. They still have it, called validation, where if they can tie you some kind of way to a gang, they'll validate you. Now in California, because it's gone on for so long, it's been about 45 years since California has taken this status-based approach to placing people in segregation. It's one of the only places that we're doing it in the country, where they would take somebody, let's say me and you were having a conversation, Michael, and they say, "Oh, Michael's talking to Ken. Ken is a gang member. So therefore, because he's having a conversation on the yard with Ken, Michael must be a gang member." And so then they'll take you, put you in cuffs, and they'll place you in solitary confinement indefinitely. So when you would have no process, you would have no due process, you would have no recourse to get out. And the courts had kind of taken an approach, and I'm sure you're probably familiar with this, a hands-off approach to prison administration. A lot of cases came down in the 80s where a lot of courts said, "You know what, we can't micromanage prisons. if they say it, then it's basically true. The standard of proof is very, very low. It's almost impossible to defend yourself against anything that happens in prison. And so they actually validated me as a prison gang member, right? As a result of having these 2 books. So they shipped me off to solitary confinement, first in Pelican Bay. First in Pelican Bay, then later the SHU unit, then at Corcoran. And so immediately for me, Michael, the first thought that I had, I was already at that time a voracious reader. I was trying to educate myself as much as possible on a regular basis, just because there weren't a lot of programs. I told myself there's no way in the world that I should be in solitary confinement indefinitely for exercising my First Amendment rights. And it really had a lot of flashbacks to me of things I'd read about slavery when my ancestors were brought over here, and they would actually commit acts of violence against African Americans who would dare teach themselves to read or educate themselves. There would be whippings, in some cases lynchings, just for reading the Bible. And so I was thinking to myself, like, there has to be something wrong with this. So I immediately dived into the law and started reading constitutional law literally night and day, 8 or 9 hours a day, every single day. A lot of people in there thought I was crazy, but I was addicted to finding out how this was happening or how this could be happening without anybody knowing about it. Because solitary confinement is probably one of the most starkest, bleakest places that you want to be. Very dehumanizing, very emasculating. Every time you leave the cell, you have to be escorted with 2 people on your side. You have to get naked. You have to be shackled. It's a crazy dynamic, to say the least.
And yet you were in there for 24 years and came back with your dignity intact, willing to fight to help other people and to improve the outcomes of the system. And that's why you're an inspiration to, I think, hundreds of thousands of people that will be watching this on the Prison Professors channel. And I really want to thank you for sharing this first half of the story. I know that your time is limited right now, and I'd love it if you would stick with us for one more episode where we could learn a little bit about some of the techniques that you used to maintain that positive mindset while living in the most degrading of circumstances. And I hope that we can all learn from that message. So can you stick around with us for another episode?
Absolutely, Michael. I appreciate you.
Awesome. So if you haven't subscribed yet to Prison Professors, I hope that you will do so. And I hope that you will leave some comments in the show notes below. I will provide, with Ken's permission, contact information so that you can reach out to him and support him. And I hope that you will do so. He is the embodiment of the change that we want to see in the world. And if we really want to learn more about how to make a better prison system, we need to learn from people like Ken, who really went through the most degrading of circumstances, but came back as a very calm and contributing citizen who can help us improve the outcomes, improve community safety, really just give us a different mindset of what can come out of our system with good training. So we'll be back with another episode of Prison Professors. Stay tuned and do subscribe, leave comments below, and please reach out to my new friend, Ken Oliver. Thank you.